There's two things that people hate: things the way they are and change. But of course, you go on the forums, everybody has something to complain about, whether that is something new or finding somebody who's in that career, or especially if it's an airline or a specific company that you want to work for, and then just saying, how has your experience been? What's been good? What has been bad? And making sure you ask why.
How many people go through life doing work they really don't like, but every day dreaming of, say, working in the aviation industry? They say it's too late. They think it would be too hard. They think it would go against conventional norms. If you never go after what you want, you'll never have it. This is Fly the Transition. Join us as we soar through the captivating stories of individuals embracing a thrilling journey into the aviation industry. From pilots spreading their wings to mechanics fine-tuning the engines and a myriad of industry professionals, each with a unique tale to tell. Get ready to dive into the diverse backgrounds, the pivotal moments that propelled their leap, and the sheer determination that transformed their aspirations into reality. We're not just about dreams. We're about making them take flight. Welcome to Fly the Transition. And now your host, Jim Schilling.
Welcome back, everyone, to yet another episode of Fly the Transition, where we explore yet another journey of aviation career transformation. On this episode, we're going to be joined by Tyler, who is currently a CFI and has dreams of joining the airlines and becoming a line check airman down the road. He came from a background in law enforcement where he was a field training officer, and he gets a lot of satisfaction out of teaching and mentoring others, first in law enforcement, but now in aviation. So we'll hear from Tyler in just a few minutes. So speaking of CFI stuff, holy lesson plans. I have been really feverishly writing out lesson plans over the last few weeks and have made some adjustments to my personal schedule. I now have probably about 2 lessons myself per week where I am going to meet with my instructor, present lesson plans, and get some airtime to really try to get into the home stretch of my own CFI rating. So as I talk about writing my own lesson plans, one thing that I'll mention is as I've developed these lesson plans, as I'm typing them out, doing the research, all that stuff, I'm gaining more and more confidence in the process of actually putting these together in the first place. I know that at first it was really kind of clunky. My formatting has changed a couple times from just bullet point Word documents to now something that is way more substantial. It's got visual aids, all that stuff. And I think I mentioned in a prior episode that I'm able to take my computer, just mirror it onto our TV in the hangar, and be able to show those visual aids as I'm going along my lesson. I'm finding that doing it that way, as opposed to just relying on a whiteboard and sometimes getting sucked into that whiteboard, to be able to have my lesson plan up there, have a couple of bullet points as my reminders, but use those visual aids on there as well. I feel more confident in my presentation too. So I feel like it's going pretty well. So I'm just going to keep plugging away, and hopefully I've got that finish line in sight here in the very near future. So speaking of in the very near... So speaking of crossing finish lines, I know that there's a number of people who listen who are going through their own transformation into careers in aviation. And I'd like to hear from you. Something I'd like to start doing more of is, as people are completing check rides or certain phases of their training, shoot me an email and I'll shout you a little congratulations on the podcast. After all, I think that building a community around people making this kind of move is really important. We all probably somewhere along the line had someone mentor us or support us or give us that little boost of confidence that we needed just at the right time. So if you hit that milestone or make some great accomplishment, please let me know. I would love to say congratulations and give you a shout out on a future episode. Another place that we can support each other is in the Discord community that we are building around this podcast. So if you want to be a part of that, if you want to join the conversation over there, go ahead and send me an email, flythetransition@gmail.com. I will gladly send you an invite link and we'll get you in on the conversation. All right, so on to our guest for this episode. I am happy to welcome Tyler Smith, who is currently a CFI, but he's working his way towards a career in the airlines, hopefully to be a check airman. Tyler was first exposed to aviation on a commercial flight back when he was 6 years old. As he would grow up, his mom was in the National Guard, so he attended some air shows, and had a genuine interest in aviation. He would feed that interest by using Microsoft Flight Sim, spending several hours a day on that to hone his skills with the flight training programs built into Flight Sim at the time. Though he had a passion for aviation and a dream to pursue that, it would be the financial costs of the college programs and flight training in general that would be a hindrance in him going down that road. The road he does go down, though, is that of public service and working in law enforcement. So we'll hear a bit about how being a field training officer and mentoring and developing new officers within his department prepared him for the role of a CFI and gave him that passion to continue to teach and mentor others that he hopes to carry into the airlines. So let's welcome Tyler to the Fly the Transition podcast. All right, so I'd like to welcome Tyler Smith to the Fly the Transition podcast. Tyler, how are you doing?
Doing pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Really happy to have you aboard. You have a career progression that's really interesting to me personally, so I'm hoping to hear a lot from you and see where this interview takes us tonight.
Awesome.
Chat with me about how you first got exposed to aviation.
Yeah, I feel like my first true exposure was my first commercial flight. I grew up in Detroit, and Pro Air, these fly 737s from Detroit City Airport, called me on down to Disney. I think one stop in Atlanta. So that's my first time remembering, being around an airplane, being at an airport, just taking all that stuff in. So I'd say that's the very first introduction.
How old were you when you did that again?
I was six. Yeah, first grade. So 6 years old, yeah. So quite a bit ago. And after that, going through Best Buy, I saw Flight Simulator 98 for like $10. So my sister was at Eastern Michigan University at the time. She was the only person with a laptop. So convinced her to let me install it on there, and then just, at that age, it was just really just playing around with it. But that's, I'd say, when the spark was first introduced.
Did you have any family members involved in aviation, or did you kind of enjoy that whole experience in flight simming?
I'll say that was it. Nobody else in aviation. My mom, she was in the Army National Guard, so we used to go to Selfridge, the base there quite a bit.
Yeah.
We went to one air show. I can't remember how old I was for that, but anybody, directly involved in it. I had a few classmates who had parents as flight attendants, but no direct connection.
All right. When you're flight simming growing up, how much time were we spending on flight sims?
It's not like when I was really, I'd say up to 8th grade, it was maybe an hour or so a day. And then summer 8th grade going to 9th grade, I actually got a nicer joystick Flight Simulator 10. And that's when it kind of went up a little bit, maybe 15, 20 hours a week. Get home from school, that's what the weekends were doing. And even at that age, it was still, I did like the Rod Machado flight lessons that you had in the sim, but beyond that, it was still just playing around.
So at that point when you're growing up, do you have any like ambitions or career goals to go into aviation?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of Nat Geo documentaries about Air Force and naval aviation. So that was kind of like plan A as far as aviation went. Hopefully doing the military, and then corrective lenses at the time, I don't think they were accepting some of the surgeries there are now. So yeah, I was like, maybe I'll try airlines once I graduate high school. So got into North Dakota, but that cost too much. Got into Jacksonville University that had a partnership with, I think it's L3 now, but it was Delta Connection Academy back then. That also would have cost too much money. So, once I realized flying might not be the best return on investment back in, 2011 when regionals weren't paid they are now. I had an interest in law enforcement. I was in the Detroit Police Department Explorers program. So, aviation kind of went to the back burner, and then law enforcement became plan A.
So how'd you get yourself involved in like law enforcement exploring? Was there, I guess I asked the same questions from before, but was it like a family connection? Just an interest?
So, that's a little bit, I would say a little more personal, but like, I got jumped in 6th grade, had to go to the police station, did the police report, and then seeing everything else that everybody else was there for. So like carjacking, CSC or raping, depending on which state you're in. I'm like, I was 12 at that time, and that's when my mom was kind of blown, like, we don't, it's a great world, but it's still not, full of fairy tales and everything. So, at that point, the fear of crime kind of became real for me. And, being able to say, hey, what can I do to fix that? So, and then, to a degree, I was 12 at that time. It was still mostly just watching Cops and SWAT and, all the TV shows and stuff.
Yeah.
But, I got into the Explorers program. My uncle, he was a detective with Detroit, and he connected me with the Explorer post there. And yeah, I was a junior in high school at that point, and then kind of a little bit more of an informed decision after that is, maybe it's something I might be able to consider going forward. Going through some of the, I wouldn't say watered down trainings that you do for Explorers, but what do traffic stops look like? How you use the radio, and then just kind of building on from there.
Okay. So is that the direction you end up going then?
Yeah. So, yes, I applied to Jacksonville University in Embry-Riddle, or not Embry-Riddle, North Dakota. Keep getting too confused. That probably gave me in trouble with some people too.
Yeah,
so,
somebody.
But
cool with me, but.
So yeah, but I didn't apply. I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I was born and raised in Detroit. I didn't apply anywhere in Michigan. And then my mom was like, just do me a favor and apply at least to one school that's in the state. And I applied to Grand Valley State. They have a police academy that is a part of their criminal justice program where you can add 15 credits at the end. So
okay,
that's what I ended up doing. So Grand Valley is still decently close to home, but still far away enough to where you can still build, a little bit more independence, truly being by yourself. And I got a criminal justice degree and then police academy at the end of my 4 years. And I was a police officer from 2015 to 2022.
I guess, was it the suburbs of Detroit, or is it suburbs of Grand Rapids?
It was
Grand Rapids, right?
Yeah, so I started in Muskegon. Yeah, I started my police career in the city of Muskegon, which is off the Lake Michigan, or East Lake Shore of Lake Michigan. Worked there for about a year. Had a buddy who worked at the Kenwood Police Department, and then just kind of, sold me on the opportunities that they had there. So at that point, I still hope to be, retire after 40, be a full-time flight instructor, and use that as the aviation bug. When I started working at Kentwood, that is directly next to the Grand Rapids International Airport. So, every day, whether I'm having a good day at work or a bad day at work as a police officer, seeing airplanes, coming in approach on runway A left and A right, every day was just pouring a little bit more gas on that aviation fire. And, just being that close to it, it's kind of like that thing that you can, look at, but you can't see or you can't touch.
Yeah.
And really just every day I just got more and more, interested in aviation. So I don't think I flew commercially when I was a police officer at all until I got married. So I had a destination wedding. And so from Grand Rapids to Atlanta to Jamaica, and then of course I'm excited to get married. But the next thing that was excited me was being on the airplane again. So
sure,
and I'm like, I want to do this when I retire, but man, it just seems to be really good now. So got back into flight sim. So got a $1,200 gaming computer. Got my wife on board with that, and download.
That's the tough part, getting your wife on board with spending money on a flight sim.
Oh yeah, and
don't ask me how I know.
Well, I can imagine, but of course, being a pilot now, that's just scratching the surface about
right.
What
right. At the time, though, yeah.
But
yeah,
they got a gaming computer, got a new the joystick set up, and I would say that's when I truly tried to. I wouldn't say take it serious, but how can I use this as a training aid if I want to fly eventually? And actually building that checklist discipline. No clue about anything with IFR stuff, but I knew what an ILS was. So doing, trying to shoot instrument approaches in flight sim. And I even did some virtual airlines after a while too, just to using that as some way of just scratching the itch. And I finally got to the point where I started looking up flight schools, calling around, just seeing, hey, what is it going to take time-wise and what's it going to take financially. And
sure.
It was 2018 when I first started saving up for lessons.
As you're in the law enforcement field, what kind of work are you doing? Are you mostly just working patrol? Do you get into specialty assignments or anything like that?
Yes, I was a primarily road patrol officer. That's my full-time assignment. Additionally for that, I was a fitness instructor, one of our field training officers, and on our special response team, which is our part-time SWAT team. So full-time road patrol, and then whenever something came up for SRT, we went out and did that. I was a recruiter as well, so all of those things were basically pulling me from the road or overtime to do all of the extra things. The last
extra things going on.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not just going in and working the road and going home. There's all the extras.
Yeah, it was a lot, and thankfully everything that I wanted to do going into it, like all that, being in the DPD precinct, at 12 years old. I was like, well, this is pretty cool. I was still scared, of course, but I'm like, well, it'd be cool to be SWAT, cool to be a training officer. And everything except get promoted was accomplished before I left police work. So, for the last 2 years of that, I was doing SRT recruiting and then field training for new officers.
Okay. Talk to me a little bit about field training. So that's a program where you have a new officer come in and someone's training them on the job, right?
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, we so like the academy gives you just these are what the laws are, just the bare bones basics to be that entry level police officer.
Sure.
And Muskegon and Kenwood, they were kind of formulated a little bit the same with the field training process. You have your in-house orientation, get used to the department's policies, procedures, some of the in the field training to get everybody on the same page. So this is where the jail is. This is how we conduct high-risk stop. And then you go to 3 different field training officers, ideally in 3 separate months. So 1 month, you're doing 25% of the work. The next month, about 25 to 75. Last month, 75 to 90, 95-ish. And then the last 2 weeks is just observation with that field training officer.
Okay.
So where you're just watching there, making sure if the trainee is making the mistakes, making sure that they catch them and then giving that retraining to make sure that they're good to be by themselves. So,
sure.
As an FTO, I did that for the last 2 years, and that can be very demanding, especially, training people that have different learning styles, so knowing what questions to ask, knowing how to ask questions that prompt them to think in certain ways, all the while maintaining your safety and theirs is tough. But I think that was probably one of the most fun things I did on a consistent basis as a police officer. So
for you, why was that the most fun thing?
I like having that mentoring role. It kind of took a while to get comfortable. One of my sergeants, when I first started there, like, yeah, you can kind of take some of these younger officers under your wing. And I'm like, I don't really want to. That's what I thought at the time. Because it may not seem like it, but at the same time, if they look to you for questions they don't want to ask me, you're in a really good position to get them squared away on the right path. Because it wasn't like I didn't want to do it per se, but I felt like I wasn't ready for that responsibility just yet. But them seeing that in me and then me kind of accepting the challenge is what kind of made me enjoy that role. Being able to see the growth in myself and then seeing the growth as, those new officers, whether they were my trainees or not, seeing things start to click for them and then seeing them be hungry to learn more, picking people's brains. So
sure.
Asking a detective a bunch of questions, asking the prosecutor after testimony, what could have done better? What was too much? What was too little? So yeah,
I think that's the part that a lot of people don't think about with law enforcement, that it's more than just what you see on TV. Like there's a lot that goes into it, especially the courtroom portion of it. And I think that's just taken for granted, I think.
For sure. And I think too, less than 10 times is where I actually had to testify for something that wasn't just a speeding ticket. So, teaching people, hey, you got to write really good reports because it could be 5 years down the road that this thing pops up. And, how much you're truly going to remember it. If your report was pretty crappy or wasn't thorough enough, you're not going to be doing the victim or yourself as much justice as you can.
So for you, what were some of the pros and cons of a career in law enforcement?
The pros, I would say, getting used to being in stressful situations, and especially in police work, if it's a chaotic scene that you show up to, they're going to look to you for that calm voice. And that's a good parallel with aviation. Sometimes panic and stress can be contagious. So if you're way too amped up, if you don't look like you know what's going on or can't keep yourself under control, can't get everything else under control, a lot of other things can start to spiral. And it was definitely a work in progress. Muskegon, you kind of got thrown into the fire because I would kind of call it baby Detroit sometimes. Like it was,
okay. I was going to ask, is it like a busy town or what the crime was like there?
Yeah, Muskegon was really, really busy. And, it was very fun for young officers, I'll say that. So, over time, I could definitely see, like a lot of those hot calls. It was a lot. But it was a good trial by fire when I came to Kenwood, which is a little bit slower, but you still had a lot of those really high risk situations, just not as frequent as it was in Muskegon.
Sure.
Getting used to knowing how I operate under stress and then being able to manage that is probably the biggest one. Being thorough with your studying, thorough with what you document is going to be another one, especially as being a CFI now. Going up for a lesson, it's not just, this is what we did. Giving the student accurate feedback that they can look back to say, this is what I did bad. This is what I can improve on, as opposed to, hey, we flew, good job, go to the next one,
Yeah.
So especially being an FTO, being able to give feedback, positive criticism, constructive criticism, and then making sure that you point out when they're doing good. So I think that's a really good one. That's a nice parallel from it. But yeah, I'd say stress management is going to be the biggest one, especially sudden stress management.
Right.
Not I got a check ride in 2 weeks. I'm getting a little anxious for it. It can go from 0 to 100 in police work. And depending on what your situation is in aviation, it can be that too. The cons, quite a few. Not a ton. And I wouldn't say a ton is just police work is still a very good career to go into. There's advantages and disadvantages, everything. I worked second shift, so the schedule wasn't bad for that. So we worked 4/10s.
For you, for second shift, what hours is that?
Yeah, so that was 4 p.m. to 2 a.m.
Okay.
So my shift wasn't that bad. I think I was able to get a lot done. When it came to working and flying, that is where it became a balancing act for sure.
Sure.
So I went to, most of my flight training was at Western Michigan University. I started there. I was able to get a flight slot right away. So flying at least 3 times a week, sometimes 4. So working 40 hours a week when I was by myself, then probably about 50 to 55 when I was FTO. It definitely increases your fatigue. It was predictable. Like having a predictable schedule is good for police work. The days that I worked were somewhat unpredictable. I could be held over. I could get called in early, depending on what the previous shifts were doing. And working SRT on our SWAT team, I'd say that was the most fun, most rewarding. Second was going to be being an FTO. But with that, we're still a part-time team. So if you were asleep and you get called out, hey, you got to go to work. And it was always fun when we did it, but it was usually at the most disadvantageous time. To support a family. So yeah, I would say it was a con and just something that, just had to work through.
So as you're a police officer, are you already working towards like a private pilot certificate or exploring aviation?
Yeah, I was kind of exploring it. So, actually was a part-time GI to save up for flight school. And, once I really got down to the numbers, I could probably afford maybe an hour a month. And that wouldn't have been anything that I could have progressed quickly with or efficiently with training.
Right.
So, ended up getting a private loan to get my private license done. So I was able to knock that out in one summer. So June 19 to September of 2019. And then everything else at Western was somewhat intermittent. So I probably had a 4-month block of instrument training, took a break after my second daughter was born. And I think 5 months after that. And then did my commercial in January to September of 2022.
Okay.
And I left police work in February. So I'd say a good half of my flight training was working full-time and getting a second degree with a full-time load.
Okay. What was your second degree in?
The second degree was aviation flight science from Western Michigan University.
Is there a point in there where you decide that this isn't just something you're exploring or doing as a hobby that you want to do as a career? And if so, is there a certain catalyst that like, I got to get out of law enforcement or I absolutely have to get into aviation?
Yeah, so I would say, like when I had that first private pilot lesson, I took off saying, yep, I'll be a flight instructor, leave police work after 20 years when I'm early 40s. And then when we landed, I'm like, yep, somehow this is going to be a career. And it definitely won't be, leaving at 40 years old. I think that was right around the time when regional started increasing their pay.
Okay.
So I was like, yeah, maybe... no, I learned best in like somewhat structured environments. So I know whatever I wanted to do it in somewhat of a shorter time frame. So that's what kind of pushed me to go to Western was the regional pay along with, this is going to be a good return on my investment if I bite the bullet now.
Yeah. So it wasn't necessarily I have to get out of law enforcement. It was more I really want to get in aviation. Yeah,
that's really what it was. This is the best time to make the leap.
Yeah.
That's really what it came down to. So, and that was a kind of a tough part. My wife was like, do you think you'll miss it? And I was like, I think I will for sure. I think the only thing I wouldn't say I left it on the table, but the only thing I wanted to do was try to get promoted to sergeant. And when that time came, it was 2 months before I left police work altogether. And it's like, is it really worth, put in for it, get it, and then still leave in 2 years? Or,
sure,
just how can I make this as streamlined as possible? Because, if I were to put in for it and get it, it would have been low seniority again, back to third shift. And, what would that have looked like for my flight training for my commercial license? So,
right. That makes sense. Before we continue with this episode, a quick word from those who make the Fly the Transition podcast possible. Hey there, aviation friends. I want to tell you about my friends over at Pilot Quarters. This Midwest family-owned business is ready to make your next favorite flying shirt. They offer a wide variety of chart-inspired camp shirts, polos, sundresses, and tees. You can shop by your state, your region, or even reach out to the guys for special requests. They're great shirts, they're great conversation pieces, so check the guys out over at pilotquarters.com today and soar in style. Are you a fan of the podcast that wants to show off your support at your next aviation event? Well, check out our awesome merch. We have t-shirts, hats, and more featuring our vibrant full-color logo, or if you prefer something a bit more subtle, go with the black stamp design. All of our shirts come in a variety of colors, so you can find the perfect fit for your style. Head on over to flymidwest.com/merch today to grab yours. We are entering the peak of summer flying season, and that means it's time to upgrade your eyewear with Flying Eyes. These aviation-inspired sunglasses feature a sleek, durable, and impact-resistant design. Their gradient lenses are perfect for pilots, providing maximum ease in reading your instrument panel. Say goodbye to those headache-inducing gas station sunglasses that fit poorly with your headset. Flying Eyes is designed by pilots for pilots to ensure superior comfort, even on the longest flights. Head on down to the affiliate link down in our show notes and enter code FlyMidwest10 for 10% off your next purchase at Flying Eyes.
You're listening to Fly the Transition. If you've ever thought about changing careers and getting into the aviation industry, welcome to your new home. Now, back to your host, Jim Schilling.
When you left law enforcement, what did you get yourself into career-wise after that? Like starting out?
So first I worked at Aflight, so just to be a line technician doing third shift fueling. And then one of the airport operations officers was driving around. He said, "Hey, we're hiring." So I looked at what the criteria meant, and I didn't have the aviation degree yet, but it was a pretty good parallel as far as having solid aviation background coupled with going through manuals, make sure that the airport is complying with everything. What that job is, just you manage the airport certification manual from the FAA. So FAA Part 139, if you want to take a gander through it, it's a good read, of course. A lot of references to advisory circulars, some more than 200 pages. But airports that have a certain amount of commercial traffic, they get that 139 certificate. So it ensures compliance with that, with everything from paint to snow removal. So I did that for June 2022 up till October of this year, and I got my CFI. I finished my commercial in 2022. Finished my CFI in December of 22, and I got to the point where I kind of really had to pick: is it going to be CFI full time, or just keep turning away potential students and keep the full time job? So yeah, it's definitely not a gap filler job, because as an operations officer, you learn a lot about everything from the private hangars, privates inside the airport, to the airlines, how they operate, and then what things go wrong, how much scrambling goes between airlines and corporate to try to handle diversions and weather and everything else. So that's what I did in between, but definitely not a gap filling job. I learned probably just as much from that job as I did with flight training.
With that job, your airport, was that a fairly busy airport?
Yeah, it was at the Grand Rapids Airport, Grand Rapids International. So
it's not just your quick little GA airport. You've got some decent operations on it.
Yeah, I think it was roughly 300 total flights. Most of those were air carrier, with a mix of flight training and then transient and tenant corporate aircraft. So it was decently busy. It's a Class Charlie, second biggest in Michigan, behind Metro.
In that role, you're talking about the airport operations side. You got all these different rules, FARs that you have to follow. What are the pros and cons of being in that position? I think you touched on it a little bit about just seeing that side of operations. If
you like airplanes, I mean, it's got to be a prerequisite, because you're going to deal with airplanes all day. So, I'd say a pro is, on a great day where there's not a lot going on and everything is going well, that's when you have a little bit of time to just take in the scene. So like if you have a C-130 or, military charter that comes in, just to truly just, gawk at the airplanes and then kind of pick pilots' brains, pick the passengers' brains, being able to talk to the control tower controllers on a somewhat regular basis. When we get invited up there, sometimes it's business. Sometimes I can ask questions about, hey, I've always thought this as a pilot, what is the best thing that you want us to do that may not be, clearly written out in the FAR range? You learn a lot about the inner workings. I think some of that definitely makes me a better pilot. So like a runway safety area, I've heard about it, but didn't know, the significance of it, how much safe space is beyond the pavement of a runway.
Okay.
If you have an aircraft that goes off, going into like the wildlife management, got to hold a red-tailed hawk in my hand. So that was pretty cool. Seeing those talons up close
yeah.
was nerve-wracking a little bit, because I'm like, if it gets loose, is it going to attack me or fly away? Like, it might attack you then fly away. So, but some of those really just cool underground airport kind of things. Just what happens when the passengers are gone, seeing all of the back things. So, for the cons, I wouldn't say some things translated. Things definitely didn't translate poorly, but I definitely had to shift my mind from being a pilot to being the airport operator. So,
okay,
for slower moving, what treatment is going to give airplanes the best pavement? Should we use sand? Should we use dry chemical? Trying to think what the pilots want is somewhat of a tricky thing to do sometimes. Finding the balance between the regulations is probably the trickiest part. So like you have a certification manual that says this is how you're going to do it. When equipment breaks, then, what do you do?
Right.
And field maintenance says, hey, we're fatigued right now, and it's not safe for us to be out there. It isn't something I have to do, but like when you truly have to pull the plug and just close the airport when there's airplanes holding, there's airplanes inbound. So I wouldn't call it a con, but that was probably one of the biggest learning curves, was just dealing with those irregular operations.
So you've moved now into a full-time CFI role, and you talked a bit about, are you going to turn students away? Are you going to instruct full-time? What pushed you in the direction of, yep, CFI is my full-time calling now?
Yeah, so the school I work at is a Part 61 school, and that's kind of one of the pros and cons as far as Part 61 versus Part 141. If you teach at Western, like in ATP, you generally have a steady flow of students. At Part 61, it's a little bit different. You could have students who are, in high school, fresh out of high school, and this is all they want to do, and they just blast through all of their training, or at least want to blast through all their training. And then you could have people that you don't have to work around their full-time jobs, which is what I had to do. So I like having that flexibility because you're not subject to a super rigid training structure. But the downside is you don't have a steady flow of students. And, early on, that's one of the tough things. I should have mentioned that as a con for police work. Police officers have pretty good job security, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
But, I get somebody for a discovery flight, and then, they get that gift certificate for $100. I want to fly for 30 minutes. I was not a salesman by any stretch starting out. So thinking of how can I'll sell them on aviation to be my student, but just say, this is my takeaway from it. Being able to explain how the school runs and how that may or may not fit into their life was somewhat tricky to start out. I had some people, they say, yeah, I work 2 jobs. Could I still be a pilot? I'm like, absolutely. But, telling them maybe this isn't a great time while you're working, 70, 80 hours a week, to where you come into lessons fatigued, or, your mind is just truly mush once you try to start to learn to fly. So that was one of the tricky things, is knowing, I'd say it's a balancing act as far as how many students can I keep without being overloaded working full time. And then finally having enough students lined up to say, I'll be able to pay my bills if 1 or 2 of these students, suddenly drop out. That was kind of the tricky part. But I did hit that point in October, and that's when I said, yep, I'll start teaching full time, and I'm just kind of roll with the punches as they come.
As you're going through this process of going from law enforcement into now airport operations and now CFI, what are some of the things you had to consider? I mean, obviously, I'd imagine there are financial considerations that you have to think about.
I think finances was probably the biggest one as I made that transition. So, and it wasn't a matter of, if, but really just when is this going to be the most advantageous? Oldest daughter, she just started school. My wife is back in grad school now, having those kind of additional demands versus the kids being home and going to school and, needing a few more things. It was tough trying to time when is a change in income and, our daily routine going to be the most, I wouldn't even say the most advantageous, but when's it going to have the least negative effect? Because it's definitely going to be a change. Yeah. But, how can I soften that blow financially for my family, and then simply just being, home and available for my family too. So,
Right.
those are probably I think those are the biggest considerations. And then financially, at the Part 61 school, how many students can I accept before the students I have existing are going to start to miss out on opportunities to schedule?
Sure.
That was another consideration as well.
Yeah, it's got to be a balancing act. How many to take on to be financially stable, but also enough that you're not bumping people for scheduling issues?
Absolutely, yeah.
You touched a bit earlier on some of the parallels to being a field training officer and some of your things in law enforcement to now what you're doing as a CFI. So can you talk a bit more about those parallels between being a trainer and a mentor in a law enforcement situation now to your CFI work?
Every police recruit that we had come in, they were all different. They learn best in different ways. I'd say matching my teaching style with their learning style is one of the very first ones, because the very first lesson is when you hope to start teaching.
Sure.
And then I've learned over time to start asking, hey, how do you best learn? Some people, they learn best with reading through the paper book. Some people learn best reading electronically, going through like Sporty's videos or King Schools. And then other ones, they just prefer, a one-on-one ground lesson to truly just go through, all the information that's in the PHAC and an airplane flying manual, to go through it that way. So to truly teach them from every single step, as opposed to reading beforehand. And then, we meet, connect the dots, explain how it's going to, mesh up in the airplane. I'm going to say that because Western, your academic classes, or effectively your ground school, and then you meet with your instructor to fly. And because that is what I was used to, early on, I did make the mistake of thinking that that's what's going to be best for everybody. And
okay,
it's just simply not the case. So, that was a learning curve for me. That learning curve is continuing. Just the more students I get, the more I'm learning how to be a better teacher. So, knowing that that's how I best learn, and that's just how Western does it. But at a Part 141, that's really the program. At Part 61, you got to know when you have to be flexible. Knowing when my students seem to be, when their mind is gone,
Right.
If we schedule a 3-hour flight lesson and we got to cancel for weather, knowing that ground lesson may not be 3 hours because, a sponge can only absorb so much. So
I know that it's obviously going to be different with law enforcement, because as a CFI, you can get to a point where like, your task saturated and we need to maybe be done for a bit. You may not have that same luxury if you're going into a call that's really dynamic and you look at your rookie and go, you're a bit in over your head there.
And that was the other part of it. As a part of our briefing, we brief positive exchange of controls, my controls, your controls, my controls. As a police officer, we had the code word for the recruit to let me know they don't know what to ask or they're stuck. And then it was, I kind of feel like it's a lot easier to see when the student, because you're in the airplane with them, right?
Yeah.
So, if we're going to be short on a landing or our steep turn goes a little bit too high, usually I can kind of figure out why, as far as what they did wrong. But as far as thinking mentally, where their mind is, that's kind of tricky. And in police work, we kind of have that point where you're stuck and I can see it. So it's a little bit of a parallel where I can, if they tell me they need help and I can step in. If we're flying an airplane, I know when it's unsafe and I have to step in and take controls. That's a little bit more of a parallel too. But the one thing I still haven't been able to find out is, or to be able to figure out, when you talk about task saturation. Police work, I can know what question wasn't asked or, what room wasn't searched. Okay. I can see if I can, like when we're coming to land, you land kind of hard and you transition too high. I know why it happened mechanically, but being able to dissect the mental process, where the student fell behind the airplane, that's one of the things that I can't quite transition from police work over. And again, like sometimes it's, hey, I got focused on the wrong point, or sometimes I have had a student before, like, hey, I really just don't know. And, because things happen a lot faster in airplanes, I think that could contribute to, how you can forget why it happened because it's happening so fast.
Like, it's interesting to me to ask these questions because I obviously know the answers, but I want to try to still tell that story. So it's kind of like what you did on the job. Like a lot of times when you ask a question, the answer that you want to hear or what it's going to be, right? So I'm trying to frame the questions in a way to solicit the answer that I want, and you're doing freaking awesome, man. So I really appreciate you're making my job a lot easier. My fake job. So
that really is, like, as an instructor, coming from the FTO part especially, it's one thing where I try to, like, just like you said, like, am I asking this question to the point to where they're soliciting it? Because, like, hey, this was our airspeed, this was a power setting.
Mhm.
Did you have enough back pressure? And we landed flat. And well, I think I did. I'm like, well, we landed flat. We we definitely did.
Perhaps you didn't.
Yeah, perhaps. And then just getting to the why part. And I mean, I've had some police recruits that were kind of the same way. Like I had one recruit, they just kept forgetting to search the front right pocket every single time. Practice on your spouse at home. Practice on me before we do it. And goes great. As soon as we do it, it gets missed again. And sometimes it's the same parallels. We'll chair fly the landing or the steep turn, and we chair fly perfectly mentally, but it's still hard to figure out where that break is with some students. And
Sure.
I mean, for me, critical incident debriefing from police work, being able to really, truly relive the moment and slow it down. You know, especially being SWAT, you're used to some things happening really fast, and then you talk about it every single time after. Versus one of my students, they worked in finance, retired, and now they're flying. Just nothing in their life has been as fast as flight training has been. You know, just trying to get people to think ahead of the airplane is tricky. Police work and people are unpredictable. I tell students the airplane is not going to do anything as long as nothing's broken. It's not going to do anything you don't tell it to do or anything you don't let it do. So,
Yeah. Right.
so always thinking about what is next is going to help you have predictable results. And
Sure.
so yeah, somewhat of a disconnect there, but the fix is somewhat the same. Is how can we think about what just happened second by second? Not just what you did, but what you were thinking, if you remember what you were thinking,
Right.
and you know, connect those dots. So
I've had moments where my instructor's like, so what happened there? And you're like, I don't know what to tell you.
right there.
Obviously, you're CFI now. What are your career goals and ambitions moving forward?
Professionally, as far as working for other people, I eventually want to be a line check airman at a legacy carrier.
Okay.
Doesn't absolutely have to be a legacy, but you know, I want to travel the world. Hopefully, not just you know, U.S. and Caribbean. So that's the only reason I would say legacy, that travels, you know, truly globally. And then sticking to that mentoring role is what makes me want to be a line check airman. You know, once I get to an airline, get my feet wet, get comfortable with the operation to the point to where I can guide somebody else through that process. Possibly want to have a flight school down the road, maybe 10 to 15 years down the road, and be able to have students come from private all the way through their instrument instructor licenses if they wanted to. There's not a ton of those in Grand Rapids that are kind of set up that way. So if we do end up staying locally in West Michigan, that's one thing that I would like to do.
Sure. What advice would you give to someone else who's thinking about making a switch from one career into something aviation related?
I'd say take it old school, and whatever that career is, write down the pros and cons to that career. What's it going to look like financially? What's it going to look like time-wise? And then getting to that point, what is that journey going to look like as well? So if it's something that's going to take you, you know, 5 years and, you know, $100,000, is that something that you would just dive right into, or is it going to be more advantageous for you to kind of spread it out? We were to have people come to the police department, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of look at it as anytime we had like recruit or potential recruits come ride with us, do ride along with everything. What I would ask them is, what are the questions that you don't want to ask the chief, the deputy chief, or any of the supervisors? To truly get, what are the things that you don't want to know? What are the things that aren't on this brochure that you have questions about? Just so they get a full representation, a full idea of what they're, you know, potentially getting themselves into. Jeff Augustin, while he's a really solid officer, he's one of the people I looked up to there. And one of the things that he said was, there's two things that people hate: things the way they are and change.
Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of the airlines will come to the college and recruit. And but of course, you go on the forums, everybody has something to complain about, whether that is something new or whether they change. So finding somebody who's in that career, or especially if it's an airline or a specific company that you want to work for, somebody who's been there for a little bit, and then just saying, how has your experience been? What's been good? What has been bad? And making sure you ask why, and not just looking at, you know, if it's just negativity that you might see online, or even if it's just selling you on, you know, all the signing bonuses and stuff that are going around, you know,
Right.
When all of that is said and done, what is your life going to look like? I would say have a true, thorough assessment on what that is going to be, just so you're truly at 100% prepared for it. For me too, I wouldn't say it's something that caught me by surprise, but the toll that it took on managing family life, especially with two young kids, having a second daughter born halfway through instrument training as well. So really taking a good stake on what your life looks like now, what your transition is going to be.
That's a really good perspective. I appreciate that. Well, all right, Tyler, I really appreciate you coming on the Fly the Transition podcast, sharing your story with everyone, and I hope that that can inspire some others. And all the best to you as you move towards that transitional phase into an airline someday.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Good luck with the CFI.
Thank you. Well, a big thank you to Tyler for joining me on this episode of Fly the Transition. I reached out to Tyler just before the airing of this episode. Got an update from him on his progress. He recently moved to Texas and is just finishing up a little bit more of teaching on his own. But shortly after that, he is going to be joining an airline pilot training program. So huge congrats to you, Tyler, as you continue to chase your dream, and best of luck in the airlines. I know I mentioned it at the outset, but I think it's really cool how he's been able to take his passion for training and mentoring and those skills from law enforcement and translate them into the aviation world. So really cool story, Tyler, and I hope that it inspires others who might be along that same track. Though I might have a slight bias to the first responder community and making this leap, I do notice that there are a lot of people within those fields who are making those transitions into something in aviation. I know for me personally, one of the things that helped from being in public safety is your ability to multitask, listen to radios, talk on radios, and then be able to take all that information in, sometimes under stressful situations, and then use that in making hopefully sound decisions as we carry out a safe and happy flight. And then insert bias disclaimer here once again, and then we'll move on. But we won't move very far. Our next episode is going to feature Steven. He is a former firefighter. Yep, another first responder. But the way that he's gone is that of the A&P. I know that I've mentioned this before, but there's so much focus on the pilot shortage, and I don't think that there's enough attention paid to the shortage that we have of A&Ps, air traffic controllers, and the like. To feature Steven is going to be really special to talk about another side of aviation that is not only in need of people, but could open the doors for some people who are thinking of a way to try to get involved in aviation as a career. So as we wrap up this episode, if you like what I'm doing, feel free to drop me a line, or what would be super helpful is jump onto your favorite podcast player, leave me a rating and a review. I'll read any reviews I get right here on the podcast, and then share this podcast with others, because the way that we can continue to grow this community, continue to share these stories, is by sharing the podcast with others to get the word out. And finally, if you want to be on the podcast or you know someone who would be a great guest, reach out to me at flythetransition@gmail.com, and let's connect and get you on the show. Thank you all again so much for listening to this episode of Fly the Transition, and until next time, keep your eyes on the sky and your dreams soaring high.
You've been listening to Fly the Transition. Life is too short for you not to do what you love. And our passion is to give you all the tools you need to make the transition from doing what you do to being in the aviation industry. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, you can reach out by email at flythetransition@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook at Fly the Transition. And the website for Flying Midwest Media is flyingmidwest.com. Keep soaring. See you next time on Fly the Transition.